What is going on, everyone? I hope you're all doing well. I'm out this evening for the third or fourth time this week where we've got crazy thunderstorms rolling through over the Rocky Mountains, and I'm out at one of my favorite open space parks, and River is over here wandering around, certainly having the evening of her life. But tonight I've got the 100-400 on the Fuji GFX 50S, and in particular this section off in the distance where there's all of the rain and the storm clouds rolling through, creating some really nice glowy layers within the mountains. And there's also some wildflowers in the foreground too that really adds an extra bit of interest in the foreground. Thankfully, the 100-400 works quite well on the 50S too. I'm zoomed all the way into 300 millimeters or so. So here's the composition that I have set up, currently set in a square aspect ratio. If I go back to the full 4x3 of the GFX sensor and increase the exposure so you can see more of the scene, ignore the parts that are blown out right now, but this is more for just a quick demonstration. I know this is a full frame lens and you can see the corners are vignetting slightly. If I zoom back out to 100 millimeters, as wide as this lens goes, there's no vignetting. If I go into about 180, you can see just the corners beginning to darken up a little bit. And at 200, the vignetting is incredibly slight. And that's actually the reason why I've decided to not yet grab the 100-200 GF lens. But if I go back real quick to 300 millimeters, you can see those corners just darkening ever so slightly. And if you zoom into 400 millimeters, you can see the worst of the vignetting. But frankly, when I'm shooting this far, I can either put the GFX into crop mode, which will take a full frame area of the sensor, and this vignetting will not be a problem. Or I can also use the different aspect ratios. So if I use the 16:9, there's no vignetting at 400 millimeters. The square format, which I just photographed this scene in, there's absolutely no vignetting. And also the interesting one, the 65:24, there's no vignetting. So I actually kind of like this scene how it is right here. So I'm going to bring down the exposure so I don't blow out the sky. And I'm set at f9 ISO 640, so I've got a faster shutter speed. And if I zoom in, what you'll see what I mean, there's just some atmospheric haze and also just wind moving just some of the tree branches in general. So I've got that shutter speed set as fast as I can get it for right now. I'm going to zoom out just a little to 375 or so. Zoom in, make sure manual focus, I'm nice and sharp on the trees. Okay, f9 ISO 640. I quite like this composition as well. So I will put those two images up right now. Be sure to let me know what you think. I'm really grateful that I picked up the Fringer GFX to EF, or EF to GFX adapter. It's letting me use my trusty favorite 100 to 400 millimeter lens that I've used for years on the 5DSR and the R5, and also don't have to spend any additional cash on the 100 to 200 GF lens. So very happy with that decision to use the adapted telephoto option. Especially because there's not really any vignetting from 100 to 200 millimeters, so it covers all of the same focal lengths and then also extends out to 300 and 400 millimeters, albeit with some vignetting, but I can also drop it down into the 35 millimeter mode, still get a 33 megapixel image, which is awesome, or use some of the different aspect ratios that I've really been a fan of lately, such as the square 1:1 that I shot this scene over here on, the 65:24 panorama, and also the 6:7 aspect ratio. All three of those have absolutely no vignetting, and this lens works quite well with. Now again, just a quick review of the different focal lengths, going from 100 into 200, very slight vignetting in the corners, to 300, and all the way to 400. And speaking of the 6:7 aspect ratio that I've found myself using quite frequently, recently at least, I've photographed this tree, at least a handful of times over the last few years, and I'm really liking tonight how we're getting some really warm, soft side light on this scene, the clouds rolling through behind it, and all of the different shrubs and wildflowers in front in the foreground. So I'm at about 300 millimeters, and I'm going to set to the 6:7 aspect ratio that I've been using more frequently. And if I hide all the info, you can see there's no vignetting in any of the corners. And I'm really liking this composition, how it is right now. Zoom in, make sure everything is nice and sharp. I've got the ISO still a little bit higher to make sure I've got a nice fast shutter speed. Set at f9 ISO 640, 1/160th of a second. And I think this looks great. sure to let me know what you think down in the comments. Well, I've put the 100 to 400 away, taken off the Fringer adapter, and put on the GF 20 to 35mm lens because I'm seeing some clouds start to form in real time that are kind of creating this wispy motion, and they look like they're pretty high clouds. So when we get to sunset here in a few minutes, those should turn bright red and orange and really glowy, as long as there's not more clouds off to the west that would block the final rays of light. But I like how the wispy clouds are kind of drifting off to the right here, and there's this bend in this dirt road and a small little tree right here that kind of fits in nice and neat with those two circular patterns. So it's a pretty nice composition, although there is this big, kind of ugly, looks like an oil pipeline or something like that, so I'm definitely going to have to Photoshop that out when I get back because it does not add to the scene. So I've got my composition all set up, and now it's just a waiting game, waiting for the sun to go down and seeing if these clouds overhead catch any of the sunset glow. Gonna play with river for a little. Ready? Go! And wait for the light. Good girl. Are you ready? Go! So now, while the composition that I had already set up off to my right here hasn't quite panned out, especially with the color in the sky, this view over here actually has, and I really like these bunch of hay bales and the way that the clouds are forming over top of them. They're kind of just swooping out, swooshing out, swooping, swooshing. They're creating all these cool patterns in all different directions above the scene, and it looks like they're kind of flowing from the mountain peaks off to the west. So I've got a super simple composition set up with the hay bales as the primary subject, the clouds overhead, and the mountains off to the west. I'm at about 25mm on the GF 20 to 30mm lens, nice and wide so I can capture all of these clouds overhead. Set at f8 ISO 100, about 1/4 of a second shutter speed. Be sure to let me know what you think. Well, now that the light has faded from the clouds off to the left here, I've moved back to my original composition. Although I did swap out the 20 to 35mm lens for the 45 to 100, it just seems to fit the scene a little bit better. 45 to 50mm seems to be right about what I need for this particular scene. So here's the composition that I have set up right now. If I hide the info, you can see this kind of flowing motion to the road in the foreground here, like so. There's this tree here off to the right, and then if I do the exposure compensation down, you can see kind of the bursting color in the top left part of the sky that's arching over the tree off to the right here. So really beautiful scene, and I think that when I blend all of these together, it'll all come together nicely. So I've got the tree, this winding motion of the road in front of it, and this kind of burst of light coming off the mountains, and it all kind of neatly fits together. So I'm going to manually focus here in on the tree, which is about a third of the way through the scene, and that should get just about everything nice and sharp. There is some motion though in the tree leaves. It's got a little bit of a breeze, so I'm gonna have to up the ISO slightly to make sure that I get everything as sharp as possible. So one exposure for the mid-tones, and now I'm going to drop the exposure compensation for the sky, just giving me a 40th of a second shutter speed. And then now I'm going to do one additional brighter exposure for the foreground. And the foreground is nice and sharp as well, even at f8. So that is the plan for this particular scene. I'm going to have to blend all of these together for the final image. Be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments. Well, and with that image, I think that will just about do it for us this evening. I hope you enjoyed this evening's video. Be sure to let me know what you think of the images down in the comments below. And of course, I look forward to seeing you around in the next one. Hey, River, are you ready? One more ball? One more throw?